Hello, everyone. LeBron James, right before Game 5 and also right before Game 4, once said, you have to control the controllables. And I was thinking about that line with respect to hypothetical debates. And, the usual, this house prefers a world where blah, 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 blah. And there was a motion we set recently at CEDO, which I'm quite proud about, to be honest. The motion was this house prefers a world where humans evolved to have the capability to breathe and live underwater. And so usually, that those debates could go quite haywire, right? Like they get very, very, very messy, very, very, very creative, and a lot of impacts, like the impact of climate change, the impact of civilization underwater, accelerated technological development, or who knows, maybe even some fish racism, blah blah blah. And so, if you come up with multiple arguments for motions like that, the most important tip that I have for most debaters is not to run many arguments, but rather to think about what are the main, mutually exclusive contingencies in the motion. So, for example, you're comparing human evolution and civilization as it is right now versus the hypothetical world with underwater civilization or evolution, and you would think that there are similar incentives, right? Maybe there's a territorial incentive, maybe there's a resource hoarding incentive, maybe there is profit incentive, right? These things would still exist to a certain degree. And so the question would usually be, to what extent are you able to, you know, accentuate those incentives or, activate those incentives within your particular side or the way that you would imagine the motion. So, for example, in the underwater debate, what one thing that I usually encourage my students to think about is, oh, if you're gonna be thinking about the climate change, technological advancement, motion, right, that or that issue, right, that it would be possible that resource um, degradation would be much worse, then you would think that maybe the world with underwater civilization makes it much easier for you to have environmental degradation, you know, because it's like, baked in to development that, there is the incentive for destruction, because it's much easier for third party collateral damage to spill over. Um, and that is why, on one hand, one side has to argue that they are forced to be more communitarian. There has to be like some level of, layering of territory that is like not as, it's more fluid in that world, and therefore it's more amorphous. So the way in which people would enforce borders would be different, and so there might be some way that we would structure the world to be like less restrictive, and that might be a good thing, in a social relationship sense, but also with respect to that climate sense, right? But on the other hand, you would definitely argue that because the risks are so much greater, then it might also create the propensity that it's just much more difficult for you to, control or regulate it. Therefore, that state enforcement or would be completely useless, and therefore there would be no need to be able to create that enforcing authority, because we won't even reach the point where it is possible to create that regulatory authority in the evolution cycle or whatever. And that is where you can be creative, right? That is the part where it's a little bit easier for you to leverage on the creativity, as opposed to be completely reliant on just running the climate change argument for the sake of running it, and then just moving on from there. I hope that makes sense. So I think that it's good to be creative. It's good to run many arguments because, motions like these, when they are set, right, they're designed to not be balanced in like, like you have these arguments that you're expected to run, but they're designed for you to challenge yourself to isolate those mutually exclusive points of those contentions. I think that's a reasonable take for motions like these, and it's good that people attempt to set it, and it's good that people attempt to debate it, because it's fun, and it's also part of the sport of debate that you know have to isolate those cautious too. All right. Have a great day, everyone. Enjoy.